anyone who's fermenting anything right now should also be excited about the fact that it gives us an opportunity to think about manufacturing models. You can ferment anything anywhere.
Hey, Karl, how's it going?
It's going great. It's quite the season of the grind right now, isn't it, Erum?
Yes. And the year of the grind, I'll say. Cannot believe it's been 50 episodes since we started this podcast.
Yeah, it's nuts. I'm curious, do you have any favorites?
Well, we talk a lot about diplomacy, so they're all our favorites. But I would say there's some highlights that just come to mind, and some of the ones that really got a lot of listens. The number one ranked one of all of our episodes is the Dreaming in Biology, where we spoke with Cass of Ginkgo Bioworks. So people are listening into that. They're tuning in. I really enjoyed the episode where we spoke with Kristen Ellis.
Yeah.
That's actually the second ranked episode. Kristen Ellis is of Lower Carbon Capital. I was amazed by her perspective, her energy. I quote her all the time, which she said on the episode, the Venn diagram of climate and biology is a circle, which is such a great way of marrying two fields because there's climate tech and biotech. And yes, they're now collaborating a bit more. But when I was talking to some investors, like, oh, we don't invest in biotech, but we do invest in climate tech. And they're like, oh, okay, let me kind of clarify what biotech is because people still default to biotech being pharmaceuticals or
it's true.
Medical or healthcare. So it's like, no, there's materials. You should listen to our podcast. We have some great CEOs that are really making climate tech / biotech. So I really appreciated that from Kristen. What about you? Which one of these episodes stands out? Who surprised you? Where did you find information that you were like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I would never have known that if we didn't have this podcast.
There's certain themes that stand out for me. On the one hand, the impact of biotech in the beauty space. So that would be Savine Sahib, our friend at K18 Hair, Jasmine Aganovich of Archaea. Those stand out. Suzanne Lee really talking about design and the impact of biology, biotechnology on design. And then we've had like a string of people talking about food, like Gabe and Samit of Orbillion, and recently Paul Shapiro of Better Meat Co. Just some really different, interesting points of view. But I do agree, like the Kristen Ellis pod was very special. Our long conversation with Seth Yakdan, who we're going to have on again soon, also really stands out. So it's hard to say. I mean, you said we're diplomatic. It's true. We can't pick favorites. But I think it's worth it to remind people why we do this podcast. We talk about it all the time. We talk about how the future is being grown. And our belief is that biotech, along with AI, are the two most important technologies of this century. It used to be, people would say this is a biotech century, but I think it would be remiss to not include AI in our definition of what this century is going to be defined by. And it's young. We're only 23 years in. I mean, Erum, why do you like doing this podcast with me?
Yeah, I mean, I love it because, as you mentioned, like biology doesn't get as much attention as AI. People don't really know what's happening across biotech. By people, I mean just the mainstream, or actually even people in biopharma. I went to a few events that are focused on biopharma. When I tell them what we do and the companies that we work with, they're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know there were companies that were making biomaterials or ingredients using biology for beauty and healthcare. Although biotech is a very, very impactful technology, just people don't know about it. And I know for a fact that it is a joy being able to have these conversations with you. And we always love spinning up ideas and companies that hopefully are going to be created or recreated at some time. And then interviewing all these amazing, amazing founders, CEOs, scientists, investors that are really building the bioeconomy. So it's just been great. I can't wait for this coming year of all the people that we're going to speak with, people that we're going to catch up with, since we've already interviewed 50 some people in the bioeconomy and seeing how they've grown because they're growing everything. It's been a pure joy.
Yeah, I will say this about the biopharma people not knowing the way biotech is being applied in other fields. The moment a big pharmaceutical company starts looking at their existing IP and starts applying that IP to other areas, they'll create $1 trillion company because they have institutional knowledge in biotechnology that no one else has. The older pharmaceutical companies spent a lot of time collecting soil samples and microbial samples from all over the world. They know what those things do. They might not be medicines, but they might have other applications. So I predict that if a biopharma company turns itself into I don't want to say synthetic biology company, but into a company that is broad as opposed to just focus on medicine, they'll become $1 trillion company.
Wow, that's really interesting. I think it would depend on what type of biotech company that they pivot to beyond pharma. I think one of the things that gets complicated is when we're talking about the cultivated meat space. There's been that whole issue of how's it going to scale? Pharmaceutical companies have it down to science, but it costs so much money to make a low volume of drugs. It's going to cost even more money to use the same principles of pharmaceutical manufacturing to cultivated food production. But when we talk to some of the cultivated food producers, they're saying, well, we're not doing exactly what pharmaceuticals are doing. We're going to be creating different innovation to be able to get the costs down for manufacturing cultivated meat. I also think when you get too big, like a big pharma company, it's really hard to change. I think about the book that we got recently, Loon Shots. Ali Wang from Ubli mentioned it as one of her favorite books on her episode. But it's just being able to create an organization that's flexible enough seems like a huge challenge, because if they haven't done it already, they'll just need to have an amazing CEO come in and maybe some consultants or maybe us. So now maybe we can help these big companies shift their thinking into being more flexible and willing to change their ways to adapt new innovation versus doing the same old, same old. I love the perspective. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's very hard to move a aircraft carrier off its course. That's why you see more partnering than you do the innovation. But, as per Loon Shots, what happens when you take a group of people and you move them into a skunk works, very smart people working towards goals, that accelerates innovation and means that big changes can happen. But if any of those big pharma companies is looking to become $1 trillion company on a scale of an Apple, there needs to be this kind of thinking behind it. The only company that I can see that is going in that direction is Ginkgo Bioworks, because of the way that they are building platforms and the way that they are creating partnerships with companies across the value chain, not just in biopharma. But those biopharma partnerships are very important because there's knowledge that's being shared.
Of the big pharma, I would say Bayer is the best positioned to be that all-encompassing biotech company, because they do pharma, they do ag, they do other things that they could expand across the biotech sectors and leverage the knowledge from each of them. But again, tiny prediction.
Exactly. So as we start to transition to this week's episode, our 50th episode, why don't we just talk a little bit about things that are going on in our world, because it is the season of the grind.
Yeah, absolutely. You're busy. You've been called upon to be on panel discussions, really get in front of a lot of universities and companies. You went to a conference recently. Which one was that again?
So Happy is a publication that focuses on the cosmetics and nutrition space. They had a small event on Friday. It was an interesting event. It was pretty well attended. There was probably about 150 people there in Lower Manhattan. There were people talking about the microbiome a lot, which is always fascinating. We've had some great episodes about the microbiome with both Stephanie Culler and Aaron Schacht of Biome Edit. Some of the information that they brought up about collagen is really interesting. We've had 2 collagen companies on the podcast. We've had Geltor, and then we've also had Gelitech, kind of addressing 2 different parts of the market. It's clear that there's a huge market there. There's a lot of opportunity there to create new products. The big thing that I learned is that there are a lot of people taking collagen. They take it for beauty purposes. They take it for joint health. Athletes take collagen as a protein. It was interesting to see that there's a lot of collagens being produced and being put out there, but that there's a lot of opportunity for that.
What specific opportunity did they highlight at the conference?
Not just in like topicals, which is things you'd put on your skin, but also different ways to ingest collagens. A lot of people take collagen pills. Well, one thing that was really interesting is I'm not sure that there's still any proof that taking collagen orally actually helps you, though I have heard from several people who take collagen on a regular basis that they feel that it does help their skin. I'm going to have to experiment to see if it makes a difference.
When we were talking to Stephanie of Gelitech, we were talking about the different ways to apply collagen, whether you inject it or eat it or apply it. But then we talked about, well, what about promoting your own collagen production? And when you and I were talking about this yesterday, we were going around the web, seeing what was out there. And there was what was called collagen boosters, which is a mix of different nutraceuticals or ingredients that promotes the production of collagen in your own body, which makes sense because if you just ingest the actual product, I mean, you're putting in your belly and then you have a whole gut microbiome that's doing their thing on it that might actually break down the collagen in your stomach. I mean, maybe it'll still go somewhere in your body, but I thought that's really interesting to think of how are you actually applying the product versus promoting the growth of that biochemical in your body.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be one direction we definitely go in the future. I remember having a conversation many years ago with a friend of mine who has worked in biotech, and she's like, I still can't figure out why we haven't been able to solve like skin wrinkles. And this is exactly one of those things that collagen would be good for. If you put on a topical that promotes the growth of collagen, but then what do you have to do to change your diet to make sure that your body is able to produce it? So these things all work together. It was interesting to see that one of the people who presented last week, she has a company that focuses on the microbiome. She has created topicals, but to go along with those topicals, she also has pre and probiotics that you would take. I think this is where the world is going to go, Erum, where you have to be taking something, could be a dormant bacteria or some kind of nutritional supplement that helps your body do the thing that you want it to do. It's not just enough to eat food. It's not just enough to eat the collagen. It's not enough to just put the collagen on your skin. You need these things to balance out. And I think things will get very complicated really quick. But we do have this whole world of personalized medicine that is coming on board. And I think AI is going to make that much easier.
Yeah, that's so great. It sounds like you were exposed to a lot.
Yeah, and then I think we should give Savine a shout out because Beauty Matter Next, which is a publication just named Savine Sahib 2023 Entrepreneur of the Year, which is well-deserved. K18 is a tremendous company. They've created fantastic products that fill some real gaps in the marketplace. And not only that, they're really educating consumers on what biotechnology is, how it works, and how it makes their products work and makes their product better. I think that's a model that other biotechnology companies that are facing consumers can learn from, because it's not enough anymore to just put a product in the market. You need to really educate consumers and get them excited about your product.
Yeah, congrats to Savine. That's amazing. And his team also won an award for their campaigns as well, because they have very unique campaigns. I know on TikTok for sure. So congrats to all of K18 as well. Besides K18 educating the public, you will be educating a bunch of students soon at Fordham University. Can you tell us about what you're doing there?
I'm going to be at the Gabelli School of Business talking about how to break into healthcare careers, something which I have some experience with. And one of the things that we do a lot is the two of us talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs, young graduates, and let them know what the possibilities are. Because one thing that university does very poorly is train you in how to get a job. So I'm looking forward to that. And you happen to be in New York City, I will be at a Builds Bio Advanced Materials event on Wednesday in Harlem. There is a bunch of new biotech lab space up in the Harlem Columbia University part of Manhattan. And I haven't been up there in a while, so I'm really looking forward to that. Have you been up there lately, Erum?
Fordham? No, I did speak at Fordham several years ago when I was in a different world, when I was the CEO of our startup. So yes, it's always great to talk to students about the possibilities, but I'm really excited for your talk and that event about advanced materials. Advanced materials pave the way for new types of innovation, especially when it comes to computer technology, when you're talking about making microchips, nanotechnologies, and new materials that have new performance characteristics. What are some topics you're excited to discuss there?
More than anything, I'm just excited for the use of biotechnology to design materials at the atomic level. I think we're at the point where we're getting better at that. We're going to get really good at it. And once we're really good at designing on that atomic level, the materials that are surrounding us on this planet are just going to blow your mind. It's hard to even imagine what they're going to be like now. But I think of being able to have a chat GPT type of generative AI where I can say, look, I'm trying to make biodegradable cotton-like material that I can wear 5 times and then throw in my garden as a fertilizer. How can we make that? And on an atomic level, it's going to give us the instructions for doing that. And maybe we have an at-home printer
What about your citrus shoes?
My citrus shoes. I forgot about my citrus shoes, and I don't want to talk about the bamboo space elevator because I feel like I've talked about that enough. Remind me about the citrus shoes.
I remember you were talking about looking at the characteristics of like orange peels and using that material to make shoes.
Yeah, I think we can use that for foam inserts. I don't think we can necessarily make shoes out of them.
Citrus foam inserts.
Yeah, and it's actually not the peel, it's what's between the peel and the fruit. So what's not kind of like the white area. I think grapefruits have it much thicker, and there's other citrus that have it much thicker. So I think we can engineer that to make some really interesting foam inserts for shoes.
And I wonder, yeah, that's so funny. This is a type of thinking that we have here at Grow Everything. I wonder if there's any antimicrobial characteristics of this material so your shoes don't get stinky. There's always so much opportunity when we're talking about advanced materials. We know lots of people that are doing this. We have people that we spoke with on this podcast that are making advanced materials, or just new innovations in general. There's so many new types of companies that are born from that. And we see this all the time. Companies that are like, wait, what is it that you do? Oh, I didn't realize that now that there's DNA sequencing and there's this type of therapy that's being investigated, there's new type of manufacturing, that there needs to be this type of company that kind of sits in the middle. And we've seen companies like that, like, for example, Officina Bio. They make very complex, long DNA sequences for cell and gene therapy, but that's their company. And they've raised money to do this. And they saw a problem from all these different advanced fields.
Yeah, that's our friend David De Lucrezia of Officina, and he is reporting to us from BioEU. So if you do some searches on either Twitter or LinkedIn, hashtag BioEU, I'm sure David has some links there. But you're absolutely right. New types of innovations pave the way for new types of companies and new types of business models. And I think that's the perfect segue into our episode today, because we'll be talking to someone who is a very different kind of thinker, Natsai Chieza of Faber Futures, who I've known for a while. And Erum, you've met her last year for the first time at Ferment. I remember you had a very long conversation with Natsai the night before the conference started.
Yeah, we did. She was just starting to talk about her new project that she collaborated with Ginkgo Bioworks on, called the Norma Phenomena of Life. That was earlier this year. Now it's come to life. So I'm really excited for our guests to learn a little bit more about why they created Norma Phenomena of Life and how it really plays a role in building the bioeconomy.
And just by way of background, Natsai is a designer. She has a company called Faber Futures, which is based in London, and it's a design agency that works at this intersection of nature, design, technology, and society. Erum, you mentioned that you met her at Ginkgo Bioworks. She actually was the first creative in residence at Ginkgo Bioworks. Ginkgo usually has, I think once a year, maybe twice a year, they have a creative come in and kind of get to know what's going on in the biofoundry and then come up with concepts that they can use a foundry for. So as you said, Natsai has just launched this company called Normal Phenomenon of Life, but why don't we have her talk about it?
Let's do this.
All right. Natsai Audrey Chieza. If I'm saying it right. Chieza. All right. Thank you for correcting me. Thank you so much for joining us on the Grow Everything podcast. We've been wanting to get you on for the longest time, and I know that schedules are a challenge, so we're very grateful that we finally had the stars aligned for both of us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And actually, you got in touch at a really interesting time when you asked me to come on. I just knew that it was worth the wait because there'd be so much more to share. Now we're past that threshold. So I hope this will be a fun episode.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, why don't you share with us what's going on now, and then we'll kind of go backwards in your story. So why is this an interesting time to have you on our podcast?
Well, yesterday we just launched Normal Phenomena of Life. which is a brand and retail platform that is really showcasing products that are made with biotech-enabled innovations. And it's very exciting because when we started the project, it was based on a lot of really interesting and valid assumptions about what needs to happen next in this field. Listening to a lot of what people in the community were talking about was important, to be able to showcase, but not the prototype, but the real thing, to be able to develop a lexicon and a language that is not B2B, but B2C. We've been on this really exciting journey to try to create a space for celebrating what's happening in the field, the milestones that amazing biotech companies are making, demonstrating materials that have amazing performative qualities, but giving the designers in the room an opportunity to really help us imagine what the possibilities are of these materials. The NPOL, or normal phenomena of life, starts to do that. We've created the sort of B2C interface for biotechnology, and we're getting really good at understanding how we need to talk about the myriad different ways in which these technologies are being created and the value that they are providing. And it's culture-led. If you build a brand, you're really having a cultural conversation about the potential for biotechnology to really shape the future. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, I really want to dig in a little bit on that in terms of what does that mean? Is the storytelling different? And how does culture drive that storytelling when we're talking about biotech produced, biotech enabled products?
Well, for us at Faber Futures with the team, and obviously this is a project that we have created in collaboration with Ginkgo Bioworks, Christina Agapakis and her team. Christina's worked very hard on messaging for biotech, but we understand that there are different layers that messaging happens. The high level, we're launching this new venture to create this new technology because this is the impact it's going to have. That's storytelling and that's a craft. Designers like to use objects, for example, to tell a story. In many ways, the products that we are creating through normal phenomena of life are vehicles for storytelling. The stories that are embedded in our products are stories about the decisions we've made about the supply chains we want to build for those products, for example. We can start through one example. We can start having a very concrete conversation about what supply chains we need to build to make a biotech-enabled future possible. And the Explorer jacket, I think, is an excellent example of that, where we've actually had control end-to-end from fermentation right down to garment manufacturing and picking zips and labels to really tell the product journey that is at play there. But then the stories that the products are designed to enable for the users. And so one of the really interesting hacks that we have as part of our product development rubric is to really ask this question right at the beginning of any design process: is what do we want that person to do, to feel, to experience? Because I think NPOL as a cultural lever is also trying to open up a biophilic culture, make that accessible, make that actionable. I think post-pandemic, we saw a lot of people really understand the value of the living world in a new way. We needed that reminder. And I think what we're seeing along cultural lines is trending towards wanting to be immersed more in nature, for example, or a more acute sense of the need for us to attend to the climate crisis as it unfolds. We didn't want to make product for the sake of making product. You kind of have to really be attuned to where the culture is going, which is that people value transparent, ethical supply chains. People value products that are meaningful, products that are well made, products that are embodied with craft, because that's where the value add really comes into play. Where we're thinking about who is going to be part of that design team, we're very much thinking who are some of the leading craftspeople who could work, for example, with a living ink pigment to turn it into the most gorgeous print, to tell a story about the medium, but also the promise that is being made with this product to the person who's going to have it. So for us, leading with culture is happening on so many different levels, and the stories that we are now able to tell and we're attuned to are many. And because each product is made with a different input. Okay, so we've got the Living Ink edition, we've got the Mbewu edition, which is our proprietary microbial dye fermentation. That opens up many different ways to talk about the impacts biotech can have and the innovations that are actually at play.
Yeah, this is why we're so excited to have you on, because when Karl told me about you, I was like, oh, that's really interesting, but I didn't really understand. And then when we met at Ginkgo before the Ferment conference, and you and I had a conversation, and you just started talking about normal phenomena of life at that time, I was like, well, whenever that gets up and running, it's going to be so exciting. And I can't wait to dig a little bit more into what you see as the future and what other products you might have coming online. But before that, I think for our audience, we would love for you to just share a little bit about your background and your inspiration for starting Faber Futures and your journey from architectural design to biodesign and how you came to NPOL.
Long story.
I know.
I'm feeling old just thinking about where I used to start there. I studied architecture at the University of Edinburgh. And when I finished my degree, I went down to London to do a course. At the time, it was called Textile Futures. They rebranded. It's now called Material Futures, but the premise remains the same. What are the implications of technology, culture, and design? And the driver, the lens through which you could ask this question was materiality. So I was very interested in moving from the architectural scale of inquiry to a more meta kind of engagement with design, which is where do our materials come from and why does that matter? Why does how we process them matter? So one of our modules sort of focused on synthetic biology at the time. And that kind of was mind-blowing to me to come to realize that there are scientists who are designing living systems. And I'm a designer. How can I work with people who are designing living systems? Because there's a connection between designing living systems and designing the built environment. Absolutely. Although I think it felt tenuous at the time, it's very clear now, those kinds of biofutures that are in emergence. But I immersed myself in a synthetic biology lab because part of our training on material futures was learn by doing. So it wasn't about theory. It was about, oh, you don't even know what the research question is, but go start making something. That was the approach that we took. So I started hanging out at the University College London, the Department of Biochemical Engineering there, because Professor John Ward, who became a long-time collaborator of mine, was generous enough to allow me as a designer, without any context for being there, to try and figure out what the research question might be. His way in was just basic microbiology 101. And he introduced me to a microbe that produced pigment. And that was when I really started to understand that my limited understanding of the deep science was not a barrier to me being there and trying to discover other ways in to understand what technologically was at play when we're talking about fermenting microbes to make things. So I developed a design practice effectively around biodesign and biopigments from microbes. And through that journey of discovery over several years, met an amazing community all over the world of people who were asking very interesting questions about how we were going to attend to the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis with emerging technologies. And it was very clear that biotechnology offered one way to deal with that. And then in 2017, I met Christina Agapakis at a conference, I think Biofabricate, and we followed up a little bit later on. She and I decided to pilot a residency program at Ginkgo Bioworks. I was interested in taking my protocols outside of an academic lab context and seeing how they would perform within a commercial realm. I understood that was going to really open up my understanding, at least, as to how these technologies are actually going to scale. So I spent about 5 months at Ginkgo pottering around, stress testing what it means to be an outsider, i.e. a designer properly in this environment, to understand how could we, if we wanted to, if this went well, build out a program that institutionalized the idea that design can live in this context and that there's value exchange that is very real and tangible between the designer and the Ginkgo community. The pilot, if you like, was a success. So we carried on doing it. And we're on a little bit of a break this year, but we've been doing it now for 6 years, which is a good run, I think, to try and discover how do you make it possible for somebody from some other part of the world to come to Boston to spend 3 months developing a design project that they have to execute within this often very foreign environment with all of its cultural codes that are not necessarily instinctive. It became a real experiment to see how you could create a rich environment for new things to happen.
And that Ginkgo Creative Residency has basically had, one designer per year about? have a designer come into the Ginkgo environment, which is a very big biofoundry, maybe the biggest in the world, to, as you say, interact with people who are very different and end up with some project at the end? Is that how it works?
That's pretty much how it works. We have an open call every year, and that open call is usually based on a theme that my team and Christina have articulated. It's usually based on conversations that are happening in the background in our weekly calls. What's interesting? What are we noticing in all of our endeavors? What could we foreground here? And who are the practitioners? Are there enough practitioners out there that we feel like this is a strong opportunity to get a good range of people submitting an application for? And that tells you about its relevance too, right? The subject matter. So we've looked at waste before as a design question. We've looked at communication. We've looked at really difficult subject areas around equity. How do we actually think of biotech in the context of equitable biofutures for all? So every year we're trying to articulate for ourselves and through the design residency, the affordances of this field to actually speak to some of the more downstream issues that might not be so readily apparent within the lab context. For me, if you can get scientists and engineers who are more comfortable holding both of those scales of inquiry as they navigate the work that they're working on, then I think we have a really good chance, at least in the field of synthetic biology, that we don't move fast and break things. I just don't think that is the aspiration of this field. I think actually we've done really well to ask hard questions from day one.
Right. And what are some of the solutions or projects that have come out of the creative residency?
In 2019, we had Andrea Ling, who looked at whether waste could be a really interesting space to build biotechnological solutions. So Andrea had a really great time at Ginkgo. I think she used the time really well to get her hands dirty. Literally, she explored the design of decay. Could biology be the agent for material transformation? And so her entire project was built around materials that microbes could biodegrade, and that could become part of a design system. So where design is really privileging permanence, she, I think, was looking at it from a completely different lens, which is to say, when do we need the design to disappear? And can microbes help us achieve that? Her samples are really beautiful, delicate lace structures to tell this story of this potential for microbes to act in this way. And if you're thinking about it from an industrial perspective, that's another critical question we need to be asking about how we are managing waste streams, how we are creating regenerative building materials that actually can feed into a new value stream after the fact. Whereas right now we just have this linear system where everything ends up in landfill. I think her work was really exciting because the poetics of it were really clear, but actually on application, it was evident that this is one way of thinking about the nature of the problem.
Yeah, it reminds me of another person that we had on the podcast from the Ginkgoverse, Alonia. We had Nicole on here. And the phrase she always says, which is a powerful phrase, is waste is a failure of imagination. And to be able to use it, it is a failure of imagination. I mean, if you think about the world, there is no waste. Humans created waste because we didn't know what to do next. And it's a lazy thing. But it's exciting to see, you mentioned the person at the creative residency, but we always love to talk to a lot of these different companies that are leveraging waste to make something. And it's, the way that you put it is very philosophical. I love the way that you ask questions and you phrase it. I think it helps people think about solutions in a different way. And so I appreciate that you bring that to the table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your experience? I mean, the way I remember when we first met each other, and I think we met before you had joined the Ginkgo Creative Residence, but you were really focused on using bacteria for textile design. Why was that interesting to you? What's the challenge with dyes and materials?
So important to say that what was interesting to me initially was just curiosity. I was curious about what it meant for a designer to be in a lab and working with biological systems, working with soft matter, working in a wet lab. I was interested in why that would change me as a designer, how it would change my lexicon, my tools, my knowledge. I would say for me, I was led initially by curiosity. And then I think it was serendipity that my collaborator, John Ward, thought it was a useful hack to give me a microbe that produced pigment. I guess his assumption was, well, you're a designer or an artist. You'll surely find something smart to do with that. And Streptomyces silicolor, the organism that he gave me, was very well characterized within scientific literature as an antibiotic. But as a very naive designer, I was like, can we dye textiles with it? That question hadn't been necessarily asked and followed through via several years of experimentation to understand, like, okay, yes, the answer to that question is we can, but it opens up other questions like, how do we get good at this? And of course, then how do we scale this, etc. But what I discovered maybe a year into the research, based on how I was developing the protocols around fermenting the microbe to dye textiles, was really looking at the dye industry and the kind of impacts that it had on the environment and beyond. The dye industry is contributing about 20% to global water pollution, which is huge. Or that 90% of our clothes right now are dyed using synthetic dyes. 60 to 80% of synthetic dyes are azo-based. These are known carcinogenics. And so there's this health dynamic that's very real for the people who are working with these technologies and then downstream as these pollutants reach the environment. And especially because we displace manufacturing to sacrifice zones. Out of sight, out of mind. And that parallel to this, we also have a fashion and textiles industry that is responsible for 8 to 10% of total carbon emissions. So I was very interested in the fact that after a year of experimentation, I discovered that this microbe is using significantly less water than you would ordinarily find in industry being the case. So that was like, okay, that's a good sign. Let's keep going. Let's see what that means in the long term. And as you start to scale these things, at least we're not using more water. But that we were eliminating completely the chemicals that were ordinarily used in industry. We just didn't need them because the microbe is fermenting, is doing its thing, and then it produces this color-fast dye. I literally haven't had to add anything to it for that to happen. Anyone in textiles will see that being able to achieve water use reduction as well as not needing harmful chemicals for color-fast dye, like those are the two holy grails. And then you've sorted both of them out through one round of fermentation. Okay, let's keep going. There's something really interesting here. And that as time moved on, and when we started to look at the supply chains for what it would look like to actually scale these processes, that you could actually come up with models that are very localized. So the carbon footprint of production could start to go down depending on how you build that out. And we're actually working on several different projects, specifically looking at bioregion supply chains and how we can actually start to create low carbon bioeconomy on the basis of the decisions that we're making as to where infrastructure goes and to what end. So I'm excited about the potential wins and gains that can be made from this organism. But anyone who's fermenting anything right now should also be excited about the fact that it gives us an opportunity to think about manufacturing models. You can ferment anything anywhere. So thinking again, well, what is a bioregion? What is distributed biotechnology? Can we create affordances through these technologies to actually distribute the benefits across the globe and not centralize production again in the way that was inevitable with the petroleum-based economy? So I discovered that all of these things are promising things and that it is worth pursuing them. We've continued to develop out the work from a design perspective to try and build out these layers as true to form a way as possible, which I think is much harder to achieve if you fundraise, become a startup, because suddenly you just have a very clear remit about what biotech should be doing in that context. I think by operating outside of that, we are able to ask more challenging questions and find different models to try and build out case studies and prototypes of how else we could imagine.
You shared a lot of amazing things here. Just a distributed model, something that Karl and I enjoy talking about too, because a lot of the problems we have in the planet is because of a centralized manufacturing at a large scale, and they just don't have a way to manage it all. And also that there are other ways to organize solutions besides venture capital, and for people to think that way, especially since biology is not software IT development. it's a completely different thing. So it requires different ways of thinking and organizing and modeling. Your whole response right now, it's very clear why you're a member of the World Economic Forum, specifically the Global Futures Council on Synthetic Biology. The world needs to hear about the way that you're thinking, what's going on in biotech, and you have this very unique perspective that people need to understand how they can apply it to their thinking and what they're doing in the day-to-day. But you've been involved in this for quite some time. Actually, the first person that told me about your involvement in the World Economic Forum was Megan Palmer. And she had brought up this activity that you guys did at the World Economic Forum about the bio stories. Actually, Megan was our first episode. So and we're actually, you might be our 50th episode. We're coming on a year. So this is actually a nice full circle situation.
So Megan Palmer invited me in 2021 to join the Global Futures Council on Synthetic Biology, the first cohort, really trying to map out the policy landscape for biotechnology, and through the World Economic Forum, which brokers relationships between different stakeholders to try to coordinate action towards certain goals. So what we are learning is that we know what synthetic biology is, but the rest of the world doesn't. For example, there's a lot of work to be done there, because then we need to establish like an understanding of what the core technologies are, what they enable, and how people should be coming around these technologies. What I was really inspired by, and the work that we developed in the first term with Megan Palmer, was the question of who is we? Who gets to decide what synthetic biology is and how it gets implemented? And that the forum concentrates a global we, but can we go out and maybe solicit some ideas and narratives and framings from a much wider pool of stakeholders? And so we developed bio stories internally through the Global Futures Council to reimagine who the stakeholders are and to reframe the terms of engagement with this question of like, what kind of a future does synthetic biology enable us? I need to be able to ask my mom or my grandma that question. I shouldn't lead with the question of what is synthetic biology? What should we do with it? I should probably ask a slightly different question. So we decided to ask participants of our engagement strategy, what kind of a relationship do you wish to have with the living world? And that if you ask enough people this question, if you ask them to tell this story using artifacts to really enliven what can feel like a very remote wish or esoteric conversation, that we start to concretize the stakes that are at play when we're talking about a global mobilization of resources to enable this sector. And what we discovered through the project was that everyone is a stakeholder to synthetic biology. It turns out, because we all have a desire to live on a healthy planet. And rather than expecting policy to be top down, that there is a way in which you can bring whole communities with you as you start to map out a bio strategy wherever it is that you are, through different levels and layers of engagement. That's one of the things that crystallized to me, that this, of course, is a technological endeavor, but it has to be led by culture and it has to be led by communities when we're talking about how it exists in the real world. And part of the challenge I think we have in the second term at the Global Futures Council this year round is really starting to understand what levers exist to be able to take some of those learnings into a more strategic framework.
Thank you for explaining that, Natsai. But I'm curious, based on this idea of expanding the conversation around what is synthetic biology, how do people want to interact with the living world, I wonder if you could bring that idea back to normal phenomenon of life. And you guys just launched this Explorer's Jacket. I think we could probably argue that it's a little bit pricey, but it probably has to be given kind of the way it's made and the supply chain that you had to create to produce that. But what you're doing in terms of like expanding the conversation in the World Economic Forum around synthetic biology, how does it relate back to the society that we're in now, where we do have capitalism as a driving force, and we do want to be able to use biology to transform capitalism?
That's a really tough question. And I don't think that NPOL can attend to all of the above. But I think by building the model and really starting to understand, like, what does it take to make that jacket? What does it cost to make that jacket, given the current paradigm, given a lack of infrastructure or joined up thinking on supply chains or consolidated efforts to actually enable these technologies to exist? We have to do something to demonstrate and come at it from a position of knowledge as to why that jacket costs how much it costs. And then the flip side is there are very specific reasons why that's the case. space, but they're also biotech companies who have been working very hard for the last 10 years to make sure that their innovations are coming in cost parity with a petroleum-based alternative. And believe you me, we're working on that product space too. But what is very helpful to have normal phenomena of life as a model is to show people what those underlying systems need to be able to do to bring everything up to a certain level that it needs to be at for it to be equitable and accessible. And that maybe we should also look at how we should stop subsidizing the fossil fuel companies and rather subsidize this industry to make it possible for cost parity to actually arrive at. It is, as you know, a very one-sided advantage that is at play. And then you've got to be able to make something real to demonstrate this to a policymaker to say, see this thing, it's real, but here are all of the range of issues that come out as a result. And those are the really granular problem areas we now need to solve. And so we're no longer talking in hypotheticals. We've got a working model that people can actually work to develop solutions for, structural and otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's so great because I think people generally take for granted the fact that the ability to buy cheap fashion, let's just use that as the example, means that you're subsidizing a lot of things that are just unsustainable. You mentioned sacrifice zones, which is a term I didn't know. You've got people on the other side of the world that are out of sight, out of mind. They're using toxic chemicals. They're creating materials that are very cheap, that are meant to be disposed of, and yet they cause an incredible impact on the planet. And then on top of that, you're shipping things all over the world back and forth. The cows are produced in the Amazon. The leather is tanned somewhere else. It's additionally treated somewhere else. And like all of these things have an environmental impact. And so this idea of being able to distribute manufacturing with biology means that you have to dismantle that, but you also have to change the way things are manufactured. And I think it's a very complex issue that a lot of people just don't even think about because it's a hyper object. It's so much to unpack at once that it's very challenging for most people to go there.
Exactly. And when Christine and I came up with the idea of NPOL, it was like, let's build a shop. A couple of weeks later, you're like, oh, we're not building a shop, we're building a supply chain.
Yeah.
The shop's the easy bit. The supply chain is the political question. It's about trade policy. It's the real meat and bones of what it's going to take. For us to have a biotech industry that reflects the values that we want to see, it's not a small challenge.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, we definitely have to have you back on because we really want to dig into that supply chain and more about NPOL. I mean, this is so exciting that you just launched this jacket. We'll have to save up a bit for it, but maybe you can expense it on the Messaging Lab account.
Oh my God, please do. Someone's got to buy it.
But it's been a pleasure. I'm so happy that we have you on now. We'll have you on again. You're amazing. Congratulations on NPOL and everything you've done. We'll talk with you soon again. I know we will. We're friends in this biotech world, and congratulations again.
Thank you both. Such a pleasure to chat, and more soon, please.
Yeah, please. Let's do it. Thank you, Natsai.
Amazing.
So, Erum, what did you think of that interview?
Natsai is so ethereal. Like, I love the way that she describes what she does and her perspective on leveraging biology and using it to make products. And she is another example of someone who's coming into biotech from another discipline. So her background is in architecture and textiles. This intersection of coming from new disciplines or emerging disciplines, we've seen this a lot amongst the people that we know, Karl. It causes new ideas to emerge. And this concept of emergence, I've been thinking about a lot, especially since I listened to Neri Oxman when she was on that podcast.
With Lex Friedman?
Lex Friedman, yeah. They talk about emergence. And they also talk about it in loon shots. Look, it comes back again. But how it's something that you can't control, but you observe it. Really, that is biology. It's really hard to control biology. Even today, people we want to design biology just like we code computers. We code computers with ones and zeros. We can code biology with AGTC. Those are the nucleotides of DNA, but it's still very hard to do that because biology is just emergent. I mean, you think of like the origin of life that emerged. So I think it's just so interesting that Natsai really thinks this way. This whole concept of her brand is also very interesting.
I'm curious, this idea of emergence versus convergence. Could you unpack that a little bit, Erum? There's a word we haven't used in a while.
Wow, unpack. Yeah. I think convergence really is when people come together. So, for example, Natsai, she converged multiple disciplines together to come up with her perspective on biology. She learned biology from scientists after she was educated in architecture, textile, and design. So she converged those ideas, but emergence, how she's putting things together and seeing what happens, is you can't control emergence. So like trying to think of an example besides biology, because that's emergent, right? You're not saying like, yes, you can, like obviously our whole podcast is about growing everything and being able to tame biology to make products that are consistent and scalable. Okay. So that is just producing. But if you're converging different ideas, what will emerge from that thinking, from that doing, converging different products together? Neri Oxman does a really good job of talking about this on the Lex Friedman podcast.
Yeah, so I had to look it up because I know the term, but I wasn't really sure what the definition is. And according to Wikipedia, emerging technologies are those whose development, practical applications, or both are still largely unrealized. So it says these technologies are generally new, but also include older technologies that are finding new applications. So examples are AI. That was the first thing that came to mind as you were talking about this. But then 3D printing, gene therapy, cancer vaccines, cultured meat, nanotech, robotics, stem cell therapy, multi-use rockets, all of these things, many of which we've talked about here on the podcast. But I just want to get it clear because I think a lot about convergence. And I guess I think about emergence without even realizing that I think about it, especially when it comes to like dual use of biotechnologies. But I think it's worth saying, as you pointed out, it can still be very expensive to build with biology. It's getting easier, but scaling is still costly. You have a lot of organizations and companies working on bringing those costs down. I think most notably is Biomade, which is a national initiative to put biomanufacturing facilities all over the United States with the idea of making biomanufacturing cheaper. But I think the model that a lot of companies go after is this recursive business model, which is what Tesla did. Basically, you launch with a very expensive product. In the Tesla case, it was a sports car. And then with the money that you make and the proof that you've gained from that product, you're able to go down in price. So you went from that very expensive Tesla sports car to the Model Y, which is like in the $30,000 or $40,000 range.
Yeah, I would say that's something that you brought up in this episode when we were talking to Natsai about the price tag on that jacket they put out on NPOL, Norma Phenomena of Life, and something that we talked about because she has an approach where she really wants to make biology accessible to everybody. When we talked to her about this price tag, yes, it's similar to this recursive model, which you pointed out. I really appreciated her response to it because she was saying that they need to highlight the supply chain.
Right.
And how they're going to highlight that and bring that to the forefront in their marketing and messaging is to be seen. But I think it's important that they do that because I think, what was it, $4,000 for the jacket?
I think it's a $4,000 jacket, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really pricey. It's going to be really select people that purchase that. And I mean, ideally, there will be people that purchase this, people that understand the value of being able to build with biology and help bring the cost down of that jacket so more people can purchase it and that the bioproducts are becoming more mainstream. But of course, it's going to be expensive in the beginning, but how do we get the cost down? So I see how we can take that recursive model, see what's going on in biology, see what's going on Norma Phenomena of Life, and being able to relate the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also goes back to something we've said previously on this podcast that, and you even said it in the intro, it's like what happens in biopharma where you're producing very small volumes of very valuable chemicals or biologics that are medicines, and they are very valuable and they tend to be priced very expensively. That doesn't translate to producing mass market products. And that's why the manufacturing of biology needs some help and people are working on that. I think it also brings into question this idea of whether the venture capital model, which people have said this over and over again, the venture capital model is broken because what you're expecting is for your company to become a unicorn or into 1000x as an investor. And sometimes you can't do that if it's going to be a long-term investment or if it's going to be something that is focused on really changing the way things are produced. So it's something that for us to keep in mind and to explore in future episodes.
Yeah, I mean, not every company should go the VC route. It's really taking a look at your product market fit, really how much you can scale the company to be able to get the return on their investment. But not all companies should go the VC route. And there needs to be new models of being able to build companies. we need to look into it more and to see what other models work for biology and maybe other companies too, especially as you mentioned, the commodity biotech becomes more real, I guess, or more into the market. What can people do? Because, there's lemonade companies. They have a lemonade stand. They're just selling lemonade. They had enough money that they saved in the piggy bank to make lemonade and sell, and they make a profit, and then they go buy some more ingredients and then sell more. What's the equivalent of that in biotech now that there's ready infrastructure that's created, some that's dormant? What can we do to use that lemonade stand model that I just talked about?
Right. All right. Well, I think that with that, that's the pod.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe it's been 50 episodes. Here's the 50 more. We love to hear your thoughts. If you have a favorite episode, please let us know. Give us a shout out. We have our contact information in the show notes. You can email us. You can text us. We are your biotech friends. So please share your thoughts, give us tips, any suggestions for guests that you want to see on our podcast. Please drop us a line. We would love to hear from you.
Excellent. All right. That's the pod. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.